The sun had not yet cleared the ridgeline above the windy corridor, when the ranger's radio crackled with the kind of message that makes experienced men go still. A lion cub, alone, western boundary of the Queen Elizabeth Conservation Area. Alive, but barely. The ranger gave the coordinates and said simply, "Bring the vet, now." Dr. Amara Ose arrived at the site 40 minutes later, dust on her boots and a medical kit over her shoulder. At 36, she had trained at the Royal Veterinary College in London and spent the last 2 years at the Rwenzori Wildlife Rehabilitation Centre, a place carved into the eastern slope of Uganda's windy forest that looked nothing like the word sanctuary implied. No manicured paths, no signage, just hardwood and wire enclosures, a stone clinic that leaked in the rain, and 11 staff members who believed, without ever discussing it, that the animals in their care deserved more than survival. They deserved to become again what they had been before the world broke them. Amara had her own reasons for being here. A marriage that had ended quietly in her 34th year, not with cruelty, but with the slow, exhausting recognition that two people could love each other and still be entirely wrong for one another. 4 years of trying for a child that never came. The particular grief that has no funeral and no permission to be spoken aloud. She had flown to Uganda 3 months after the divorce and had not seriously considered leaving since. She understood, in the way people who have lost something irreplaceable always do, what it looked like when a living thing decided to stop fighting, which was exactly what she saw when she knelt beside the lion cub in the dry gully. He was approximately 3 weeks old. His umbilical scar had dried but not healed. He weighed 1.1 kilograms. A healthy cub his age should have weighed nearly 2. His spotted coat lay flat against visible ribs, and each breath was a separate, effortful event. The rangers had found lion tracks nearby leading toward a known poacher snare line. His mother had not come back. He had been alone in open heat for at least 36 hours. She brought him to the center and named him Kesi, Swahili for born in difficult times. For 6 days the pattern was merciless. Each morning, Amara tried every feeding technique she knew, different bottle angles, different teat sizes, different formula temperatures. Each morning Kesi turned his face away, slowly, deliberately, like a door being closed from the inside. By day 6, his weight had dropped to 1.0 kilogram. His cortisol levels were 3 times the normal range for a neonatal lion. His intravenous line was keeping him technically alive. It could not make him want to stay. On the evening of day 6, Amara called the review meeting. She laid Casey's chart in front of the center's director, Dr. Kwame Asante, headkeeper Francis Biarohanga, and great ape specialist Josephine Nakato. The numbers needed no commentary. 40% weight loss. Complete refusal of oral feeding for 6 consecutive days. Cortisol levels that were, in clinical terms, incompatible with recovery. Dr. Asante looked at the numbers for a long time. "If he will not eat," he said quietly, "we may be prolonging his suffering rather than preventing it." The room held the silence the way a held breath holds, tightly, and only for so long. Amara asked for 72 more hours. She had no plan, only the instinct that Kesi's story was not finished yet. Kwame gave her the time without asking what she intended to do with it. At 5 in the morning, Amara relocated Kesi's warming enclosure to a small room sharing a wall with the great ape section. There lived Baraka, a 9-year-old silverback mountain gorilla with a watchful, patient intelligence. Each morning he paced the fence line, unhurried, consistent. His way of confirming the world was where it was supposed to be. At 10:22, Baraka stopped mid-circuit. He had caught the lion cub's scent through the shared wall. Then he made a sound. A low, resonant rumble. Not alarm, but a contentment rumble of full, unhurried attention. Inside the anteroom, Kesi's ears shifted forward. Just slightly, just a degree, but forward. Away from their flat, stressed position toward the wall. His nostrils flared. His breathing moved into a rhythm more regular than anything Amara had recorded in 6 days. She set down the bottle. She sat completely still and watched. Baraka's vocalization continued for 4 minutes. For 4 minutes, Kesi's ears stayed forward and his breathing stayed steady. When the sound stopped, the cub's ears slowly pressed back, like a flower closing at dusk. Amara went to find Josephine. The fence introduction was arranged that same afternoon with every safety protocol in place. 2 keepers positioned for immediate intervention, double mesh barrier, clear withdrawal plan. At 2:40 p.m., Amara carried Kezi to the fence. Josephine positioned Baraka on the other side. The gorilla arrived and sat. The way he lowered himself, slowly, shoulders dropping, weight distributed carefully, told every experienced person watching that something deliberate was happening. He was making himself smaller. He understood that the creature on the other side of the wire required gentleness, not presence. He extended one arm and pressed his palm flat against the mesh, fingers spread, and made the sound again. Kessie's head turned, not the faint ear shift of the morning. A full, effortful turn toward the gorilla on the other side of the fence. He held it there for 90 seconds, the longest, sustained attention he had shown toward anything since his arrival. That evening, Amara offered the bottle with no expectation. Kessie drank 11 milliliters. Not enough, but he drank. The fence sessions became the rhythm around which Renzori organized its days. Twice daily, Baraka would settle at the mesh and begin his vocalizations, and Kezi would orient toward the sound with an attention he gave to nothing else. The feeding record told the story clearly: 11 milliliters on day 7, 34 on day 8, 62 on day 9. By day 14, Kesey's temperature had stabilized. By the end of week 3, he weighed 1.9 kilograms and stood under his own power for 11 seconds before his legs gave out, and everyone watching exhaled as though they had been underwater. A visiting researcher, Dr. Priya Chandrasekaran from the University of Edinburgh, arrived in the 4th week, and later published a paper describing what she witnessed as cross-species emotional co-regulation. Her cortisol data was precise. Kesey's stress hormones declined most sharply following the fence sessions, correlating directly with contact frequency rather than any change in medical treatment. Baraka's own cortisol levels dropped in parallel. The regulation flowing across that wire mesh was not one-directional. Both animals were giving something to each other that neither could have found anywhere else. By his 2nd birthday, Kesey weighed 96 kilograms. His mane had begun to thicken around his face and throat, deep amber, catching the afternoon light like something molten. He moved through his enclosure with the unhurried confidence of an animal that understood exactly what it was built for. The fence sessions with Baraka continued twice weekly, and both arrived at the wire with the same focused attention they had brought to it from the beginning, as if no distance had ever accumulated between them. Baraka, at 12 years old, carried 141 kilograms. His silver saddle had fully developed across his shoulders, and the quiet authority he radiated was felt in the adjusted movements of every animal and person in his vicinity. The morning that changed everything came on a Wednesday in November, dry season, when the grass beyond the perimeter had gone the color of old straw, and the air tasted of dust and heat. Amara was in the clinic when Frances came to the door at the pace she had learned to read accurately. Controlled, deliberate, just below running, poachers, eastern boundary. A cable snare had closed around Baraka's right ankle. He had breached a section of damaged perimeter fencing. No one could explain why, because his enclosure did not border the eastern edge of the facility. Kessie's expanded territory had been relocated to the eastern zone 3 weeks earlier. The direction Baraka had been moving when the snare caught him was directly toward it. He had stopped struggling by the time the keepers reached him. He was seated in the dust, injured leg extended, cable taut, his face turned toward the eastern fence line, toward Kessie. Amara removed the snare herself, kneeling in the red dirt with steady hands, in the way she could always be steady when an animal needed it from her, even when nothing else in her was. The wound required suturing and weeks of restricted recovery. Baraka would heal, but he would be separated from the fence sessions, separated from Kessie for a long time. On the 3rd day of Baraka's recovery, before morning feeding rounds began, Francis found Kessie at the eastern fence of his zone, pressed against the wire at the single point that brought him closest to the recovery building. The lion had walked the full length of his territory, nearly 400 meters, to get there. He was not pacing, he was not vocalizing. He was simply sitting, weight low, body relaxed, face directed toward the building where Baraka lay injured. He stayed for 3 hours before the heat moved him to shade. He came back in the afternoon. He came back the next morning. Every day, for 11 consecutive days, Kessie arrived at that fence at first light and stayed until the temperature forced him away, then returned when it dropped. The keepers began adjusting their rounds around his vigil rather than asking him to move. There was something in the quality of his stillness that made interruption feel wrong. On the 12th day, with Baraka's wound healing cleanly, Amara and Josephine opened the gate between the recovery area and the neutral meeting zone. They positioned Kessie inside. For the first time in years, there was no wire between them. Baraka walked through slowly, his right leg carrying a faint favor. He stopped 2 meters from Kessie, assessed the space with his characteristic unhurried attention, then crossed the remaining distance and sat beside the lion. He made the sound, the low, resonant rumble that had reached through a clinic wall 5 years earlier, and pulled a dying cub back toward the world. Kessie's eyes half closed. The whole of his 96 kilograms relaxed with the completeness of an animal that had arrived somewhere it recognized as safe. He pressed his head gently against Baraka's shoulder. The gorilla placed one hand carefully on the lion's neck, the same gesture, the same quiet offering, and did not move away. Francis stood at the observation point and said nothing. He was a man who had spent 20 years learning the languages animals used when they had no other choice. He understood what he was looking at. He simply let it be what it was. In the years that followed, their story raised funding for anti-poaching operations along the Bwindi corridor and brought researchers from 6 countries to a center that had once run on a personal loan and a belief. But for Amara, the meaning lived somewhere quieter than any of that. She had arrived at Rwenzori carrying a grief without a name, and she had watched a gorilla teach a dying cub that the world was worth staying in. She had then watched that cub, grown, golden and magnificent, walk 400 meters every morning for 11 days to sit at a fence and refuse to leave his friend alone. 2 lives, 2 rescues, no hesitation either time. At dusk, when the dry season turned the sky above Bwindi into amber and copper, the staff would sometimes stop whatever they were doing and look toward the neutral zone. The gorilla, silver-shouldered and still, the lion, golden and unhurried, the distance between them so small it barely existed. They had found each other when neither had anything left to give. They had given anyway, and in that simple, wordless, repeated choice, they had proved the only thing that has ever really mattered. That love does not stop at the boundary of a species. It does not stop at the boundary of anything. It reaches and reaches until it finds what it is looking for.